The worn leather of the suitcase seemed to groan under the burden of everything he owned, clutched tightly by a boy's hands that betrayed his internal tremor. "I'm here to claim my inheritance." The words were swallowed immediately by the sterile vastness of the space. Richard Sterling's initial, arrogant laughter was a cold, echoing sound that bounced off the polished marble and crystal, a sound designed to crush hope. But that laughter was eventually replaced by an absolute, terrifying silence when the definitive DNA results arrived. A silence that signaled the irreversible dismantling of his meticulously built world. The head of security, a man named Marcus whose posture was as rigid as the steel frame of the building, instinctively reached for the radio clipped to his belt the moment the boy passed through the sleek, revolving glass doors of Sterling Industries. The boy, barely 12, perhaps 13, was hauling a canvas suitcase so scarred and beaten it looked like a refugee from a forgotten decade. His thin frame was lost inside clothes that smelled faintly of old laundromats, and his sneakers were a testament to gritty resourcefulness, stabilized entirely by sheer determination and gray duct tape. He was an anomaly, a visual pollutant in this palace of finance, radiating the absolute certainty of wrong place, wrong world. Yet, the boy moved with an astonishing, almost shocking lack of subservience. He strode across the polished expanse of Italian marble as if tracing the borders of his own estate. "Hold it right there." Marcus intercepted him, deploying the practiced, surgical authority honed from years of removing thousands of unwanted petitioners. "This is private property, son. You require a scheduled meeting to proceed." The boy halted and lifted his gaze. His eyes, an extraordinarily rare, luminous shade of deep green flecked with brilliant gold that seemed to trap the ambient light, locked onto Marcus's stern face without the slightest tremor of fear. "I need to speak with Richard Sterling. I am here to claim my inheritance." The single word, inheritance, detonated the silence, striking the opulent lobby like a fragmentation grenade. Half-finished sentences died on the tongues of vice presidents. $500 Italian leather shoes froze mid-stride on the expensive marble. Within seconds, every occupant of that soaring structure, the entire cathedral of glass and steel, was turned toward the ragged boy who had just uttered something so profoundly absurd it had to be heard again. Marcus's expression cycled instantly from annoyance to profound confusion, settling finally on a flicker of something that might have been unease. "You are claiming what exactly?" Ethan reached into his threadbare canvas jacket, likely a donation from a forgotten thrift store, and produced a thick, official-looking envelope. His hands were shaking almost imperceptibly, the sole physical evidence that the confidence he projected was a desperate performance. "This legal document states I am entitled to claim my rights from the Sterling estate. I must see Richard Sterling immediately." Marcus took the envelope as gingerly as if it were rigged with explosives. He unfolded the document within, and in that silent, suspended moment, every witness saw the blood completely recede from the security chief's face. "Where did you obtain this?" Marcus demanded, his voice thin. "My mother." The boy's voice fractured painfully on the single syllable. "She passed away 3 weeks ago. I found this with her most important things, along with this." He withdrew a photograph, its edges softened and worn thin from years of handling. "That's her, standing next to a man named Jonathan Sterling. The letter claims he was my father." The whispers instantly swelled into a roaring storm of disbelief. Jonathan Sterling? Preposterous. He died years ago. He was childless. This is an elaborate hoax. A society woman dripping in pearls and cashmere actually tightened her grip on her 5-figure handbag, physically retreating 3 steps as if poverty were a violently contagious disease. 2 executives whose suits collectively cost more than a reliable used car whispered behind shielded hands, their faces mixing visceral shock with barely contained disgust. Marcus quickly contacted the top floor. "Mr. Sterling, we have a critical situation developing in the main lobby. You need to come down here immediately." A voice crackled back, honed sharp by irritation. "I am in the middle of a board meeting, Marcus. Handle it." "Sir, you truly need to see this. It concerns Jonathan." A profound, Chilling silence followed this revelation. "I'll be right down." 30 agonizing seconds later, the private executive elevator chimed, and Richard Sterling emerged, stepping onto the marble floor with the assured, proprietary stride of a monarch viewing his undisputed territory, because that is precisely what he was. At 56, he was the architectural intelligence behind Sterling Industries' multi-billion-dollar empire, a man defined by ruthless efficiency and absolute control. His perfectly sculpted silver hair did not tolerate a single stray strand. His bespoke suit was clearly sourced from Savile Row, and his mirror-polished shoes reflected the immense crystal chandelier above with flawless precision. He was the embodiment of financial power, success made incarnate. Everything the boy in his lobby was utterly and miserably not. Richard's cold, hawk-like gaze swept the entire space, settling upon Ethan with the detached, clinical assessment he usually reserved for reviewing high-risk quarterly reports. His expression didn't merely show disdain. It radiated pure, superheated contempt, like rising heat shimmering off black asphalt. "Marcus," Richard's voice sliced through the nervous whispers like a freshly sharpened blade. "Explain to me why there is a visibly homeless child disrupting the entrance of my headquarters." The words were deliberate, public, and delivered like stinging physical blows. People gasped. One assistant nervously muffled a laugh. The woman in pearls nodded furiously, validated. Ethan flinched visibly, a small ripple of pain, but his stance remained defiantly rooted. "I am not homeless, and I am not leaving until you consent to hear what I have to say." Richard's silver eyebrows arched slightly, surprised that the boy could articulate a complete sentence. "Excuse me? My name is Ethan Cole." The boy's voice gained surprising strength with every syllable. "My mother was Sarah Cole, and according to this binding letter," he held the envelope aloft, "Jonathan Sterling was my father, which, by extension, makes you my uncle and makes me entitled to my rightful inheritance." The full, unexpected weight of the name Jonathan Sterling struck Richard like a heavy, unexpected punch. His carefully maintained, flawless composure cracked for a single searing second. Shock, a shadow of pain, and something utterly raw flashed across his face before the mask of corporate ruthlessness slammed violently back into place. "Jonathan Sterling," Richard repeated the name, his voice low and dangerously controlled. "He was my younger brother. He died 11 years ago in a horrific car accident. He was 28 years old, and he did not have any children. He had me." Ethan's voice was barely a tremor, yet it held firm against the assault. "I am 12. My mother discovered she was pregnant just weeks before his death. She never told him. She never told anyone." He choked on the last word. "She was—" His voice broke completely. "She was terrified." Terrified of what? Richard's voice was now saturated with venom. "Of people like you," Ethan stated plainly, meeting Richard's gaze without blinking. "People who would instantly label her a gold digger. People who would claim she intentionally trapped him into marriage. People who would treat her exactly as you are treating me right now. Like she was worthless because she wasn't rich, because she mattered less." The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than the earlier shock. No one in that lobby, not even the longest-serving executives, had ever witnessed anyone, least of all a mere child, speak to Richard Sterling with such defiant, brutal honesty. Richard's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable crimson. "Marcus, give me that letter immediately." Marcus handed over the document, his hand shaking faintly. Richard devoured the contents, his expression cycling rapidly through raw denial, building fury, and finally settling on something that looked chillingly like genuine fear. "This is a crude forgery," Richard announced to the frozen, watching crowd, his tone unyielding. "An amateur scam designed to exploit the Sterling name. Marcus, summon the Metropolitan Police. I want this child arrested and charged with attempted fraud immediately." "No!" Ethan's despairing shout ricocheted painfully off the marble walls. "It is real. My mother was not a criminal. She worked 3 grueling jobs her entire life and never took charity from anyone. She died at 39 because her body finally surrendered to utter exhaustion. I was there. I watched her collapse right there on our kitchen floor while I called 911, screaming for them to hurry. His voice shattered, finally giving way to profound grief. Tears streamed down his face, and he made no effort to hide them. He stood exposed, a 12-year-old boy in borrowed clothes, weeping openly before dozens of judging strangers who regarded him as nothing more than a stain on their perfect Italian marble. She never wanted your money? Ethan continued, struggling through his tears. She kept that letter hidden for 12 years and never once used it. She could have claimed this inheritance at any moment. She could have given us a comfortable life, but she refused. Do you want to know why? He took one furious step forward, and Richard Sterling, the billionaire CEO, actually took one step back in reflex. Because she knew you would treat us exactly like this, like we are nothing, like we are liars and criminals simply for existing. So she literally worked herself to death instead. She sacrificed everything she had just to protect me from facing people like you. Your mother was a cleaning woman who somehow managed to acquire confidential legal documents, Richard stated coldly, though his voice shook slightly despite his effort at control. I do not know what convoluted game you are playing, boy, but it terminates now. Security. Wait. A new, authoritative voice cut through the toxic atmosphere. An older man, appearing to be in his late 60s, stepped calmly out of the executive elevator. He wore a simple, excellent suit, thin-rimmed glasses, and carried a worn leather briefcase that spoke of decades of high-level secrets. Richard, what exactly is happening here? Lawrence. Impeccable timing, Richard replied, sarcasm dripping like acid. This street urchin is claiming to be Jonathan's son using an obvious forgery. I am having him removed. Lawrence Abbott was not just the Sterling family attorney. He had been their trusted confidant for 30 years. He had personally drafted Jonathan's last will. He had been present the day Jonathan died. And as his sharp, experienced eyes focused entirely on Ethan Cole, all the color drained from his face, leaving his skin sickly white. Dear God, Lawrence breathed, a sound that carried far in the silent lobby. He has Jonathan's eyes. The lobby instantly erupted in a fresh cascade of horrified whispers. Richard spun violently toward his attorney. What are you saying? Those eyes? Lawrence insisted, walking forward, disregarding Richard completely. He studied Ethan's face with unsettling intensity. Jonathan had those exact eyes. That unique, brilliant shade of green with genuine gold flecks. I have seen eyes like that only once in my life on your brother. And now this boy stands here claiming connection, carrying the exact same defining feature. That proves nothing. Coincidence. Genetics. Richard snapped, agitated. It does not. Let me see the document, Lawrence commanded quietly. Richard reluctantly surrendered the letter. Lawrence immediately pulled out his secure phone, photographed the document, and sent a rapid, coded inquiry. The phone chimed almost instantly. He read the reply, and his hands began to tremble visibly. Richard, Lawrence began, carefully avoiding Richard's gaze. We must speak immediately and privately. I am not leaving until this preposterous claim is dealt with, Ethan interjected firmly. The letter is real, Lawrence stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Time seemed to warp and compress. In the opulent, silent lobby, breathing itself became a strenuous effort. What? Richard's response was a rasping, barely audible whisper. The signature is authentic. The seal matches our official archives. The document number is active in our corporate legal system. Lawrence shakily adjusted his glasses. This letter was issued by our department 12 years ago, shortly after Jonathan's death, as specifically mandated by your father's will. That is utterly impossible. Father never mentioned. Your father included a secret, binding provision in his last will and testament. If Jonathan ever produced a legitimate child, that child would automatically inherit his full 40% ownership share of Sterling Industries. Lawrence looked gravely at Ethan. Young man, what is your date of birth? March 7th. Lawrence quickly performed the calculation, his face turning increasingly ashen. Jonathan died in June 11 years ago, meaning the mother was already pregnant when the accident occurred. Jonathan never knew he was going to be a father, Richard finished, his voice suddenly hollowed out. Ethan slowly wiped away his tears with the back of his hand. No, he never knew. Mom found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after the accident. She said she screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. She wanted him to know. She wanted... His voice broke again. She wanted him so desperately, but he was gone. An unmistakable shift occurred in Richard's rigid posture. The freezing contempt receded, replaced by a complex, painful mixture of loss and the sudden, vivid memory of his younger brother. Jonathan always wanted children, Richard murmured, almost to himself, his gaze distant. It's all he ever talked about. Father told him he was too young, too reckless. But Jonathan didn't care. He was constantly sketching crude pictures of the house he'd build, the family he'd have, the life he intended to live. He stopped, now looking at Ethan with entirely new eyes, recognizing something deeper than physical features. He would have loved being a father. He would have been exceptional at it, Lawrence added softly. Jonathan possessed the largest heart of anyone I have ever known. Richard closed his eyes, his jaw muscles clenching tightly. When he reopened them, they were unervingly bright and wet. You have his eyes, Richard stated to Ethan, the words rough, and his jawline, and the exact way you are standing there, trying so desperately to appear brave when you are obviously terrified. That's precisely how Jonathan stood when our father used to shout at him. Ethan's breath hitched. You truly think I resemble him? I think you are the terrifying ghost of my brother walking into my lobby and systematically destroying everything I thought I knew, Richard said, his voice raw with emotion. Lawrence, if the pending DNA test conclusively confirms this, what is the financial reality? If Ethan is Jonathan's biological son, Lawrence stated, his voice carefully controlled, he is entitled to his father's full 40% ownership share of the company. At the current market valuation, that equity is worth approximately $450 million. The staggering sum hammered through the suddenly small lobby like a cannon shot. Ethan swayed violently, instinctively clutching the handle of his battered suitcase for physical stability. $450 million. His mother had died with $32 remaining in her checking account, without health insurance, without savings, without anything except a desperate hope that her son might somehow survive. Where are you currently residing? Lawrence asked, his tone now infused with genuine gentleness. A motel? Ethan answered, his voice reduced to a small, frail sound. The kind that rents by the week. I have just enough money left for 3 more nights. And after those 3 nights? Ethan shrugged, attempting a facade of resilience that utterly failed. Richard inhaled sharply, a guttural sound like a physical blow to the diaphragm. Jonathan's only son, living alone in a decrepit weekly motel. I'm not entirely alone, Ethan corrected quickly. Mrs. Chun, she was Mom's friend. She checks on me every day, brings me meals sometimes. But she has her own kids, and she can't. He stopped, unwilling to confess just how terrifying the isolation was. Lawrence, Richard commanded, his voice suddenly thick and strangely resonant. Arrange immediate accommodations. Proper hotel suite. Establish a substantial temporary financial fund for his every basic need. Do it now. Richard, No. Richard interrupted fiercely, surprising everyone present, including himself. I absolutely will not permit my brother's child to spend another night in a roadside motel. Not while I draw breath. We will proceed with the DNA testing. We will verify every single detail. Richard continued, looking at Ethan, truly seeing him now, and something inside his hardened face visibly cracked open. But until that time, you are not spending another night scared and abandoned. Whatever the results show, you are family. Or you might be, and that potential connection is enough. Ethan stared at the man who had publicly denounced him as a homeless child only 5 minutes prior. The the man who had mocked his mother's memory, who was now offering profound, urgent assistance with tears blurring his own perfect vision. "Why?" Ethan whispered, confusion eclipsing his fear. "You still don't even believe my claim." "I believe you possess my brother's eyes," Richard responded roughly, the words scratching in his throat. "I believe your mother guarded that document for 12 years without claiming its power. I believe you walked into my world terrified out of your mind and faced me down nonetheless. And most importantly," his voice finally broke, "I believe my brother Jonathan would never, ever forgive me if I turned away his vulnerable child. Confirmed or not, real or not, you are here. You require help. And Jonathan would demand that I give it." Lawrence quickly pulled out his phone. "I will manage every detail. The DNA test, the secure hotel, the necessary financial support. The results require a minimum of 72 hours. 3 days, Ethan repeated numbly. "In 3 days, I will know for sure." "In 3 days, Richard gently corrected, his voice softening. "We will all know for sure. And either way, your life is about to fundamentally change." He walked closer to Ethan, until they stood face to face. The ruthless billionaire CEO and the 12-year-old boy, the potential uncle and nephew, two individuals separated by social chasms, yet linked by inescapable blood, profound grief, and the undeniable ghost of Jonathan Sterling. "I am sorry," Richard finally said, and the two simple words sounded as if they were tearing him apart from the inside. "For my words, for the way I treated you, for assuming the absolute worst about you and your mother. You both deserved significantly better than my contempt." Ethan's eyes filled with fresh tears. "She always said you were terrifying. She said the Sterling family would never accept us, that we were simply not good enough for your world. She was shielding you from people like me," Richard said, his tone heavy with bitter self-recrimination. "From the cold, cynical person I've allowed myself to become. And she was right to be afraid because I confirmed every single one of her fears within the first 5 minutes you stood in this lobby." "But you are helping now," Ethan said quietly. "That has to count for something." Richard's laugh was hollow and devoid of humor. "Maybe. Or maybe I am just desperately trying to ease my conscience before I find out if I have completely destroyed my nephew's faith in basic humanity." Lawrence cleared his throat, directing the attention back to the practicalities. "The test, Richard. We need the necessary sample from Ethan for the DNA analysis." "Of course." Richard wheeled around, addressing the dozens of people who had been frozen spectators throughout the entire seismic confrontation. "Everyone, return to your duties immediately. This is private family business, and I guarantee you this. If I catch even one whispered word of this confrontation leaked to any media outlet, you will all be permanently looking for new employment." The expansive lobby cleared out with startling speed. Only Marcus remained, his expression a complicated mixture of shock, shame, and confusion. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I apologize. I didn't mean to." "You performed your function?" Richard cut him off, his voice firm but subdued. "But Marcus, the next time a young child walks into this building claiming any connection to this family, perhaps we afford them basic human decency before we automatically assume they are common criminals." Marcus merely nodded, visibly chastened. Ethan followed Richard and Lawrence into the private executive elevator. As the ornate brass doors closed, severing his connection to the glittering, judgmental lobby, he caught his own reflection in the polished metal surface. He looked exactly like what he was. A frightened, tiny kid in clothes 3 sizes too large, carrying his meager possessions in a busted suitcase, clinging to the desperate hope that the letter his mother had fiercely guarded for 12 years would save him. The letter that was apparently real. The letter confirming his father was Jonathan Sterling. The letter that meant he was potentially 72 hours away from becoming one of the wealthiest teenagers in the country. Or he was 72 hours away from becoming a legally confirmed homeless child with absolutely nowhere to go, waiting for reality to crush the life out of his fragile hope. The elevator silently ascended toward the 45th floor, carrying Ethan Cole into a future he could neither fully grasp nor possibly escape. All he could think of was his mother, who had died trying to shield him from this precise moment, who had sacrificed her entire existence so he would never have to face Richard Sterling's specific contempt, who had loved him enough to die poor rather than risk having him rejected by a family she believed would destroy them both. "Mom," Ethan whispered, the sound so faint that neither Richard nor Lawrence heard it above the soft hum of the machinery. "I truly hope I am doing the right thing." But there was no reply, only the relentless, silent ascent into a world his mother had feared beyond all measure. A world that was now positioned to either utterly destroy him or finally save him. In 72 hours, he would know the verdict. The DNA test itself required a mere 15 minutes. The subsequent waiting period occupied 3 days that stretched into 3 excruciating eternities. Ethan spent those 72 hours suspended within a hotel suite that cost more per night than his mother had managed to earn in an entire month. He was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows overlooking the sprawling city below, a bathroom boasting silently heated marble floors, and a bed so vast he felt he might starve to death before reaching the other side. Room service delivered exquisite meals at the press of a button. Food he barely touched. His stomach cinched into a tight, hard knot of anxiety. He called Mrs. Chun that first evening, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "The test is finalized. The results are due in 3 days. And if it's positive?" Mrs. Chun inquired gently. "Then I am rich. Richer than I can possibly comprehend. And if it's negative?" Silence. Because if the results were negative, Ethan was left with absolutely nothing. No home, no family, no prospects, just a 12-year-old boy with the clock rapidly winding down on 3 last nights in undeserved, alien luxury before the crushing reality returned. "Mrs. Chun, what if Mom was mistaken? What if she got confused, or lied to herself, or—" "Your mother never lied," Mrs. Chun stated firmly, cutting him off. "Not once in the 15 years I knew Sarah Cole. If she said Jonathan Sterling was your father, then he was. You must hold on to your faith, Ethan. Do you hear me? Faith." But faith was a heavy, impractical concept when you were isolated in a palatial hotel room that cost more than your dead mother's funeral expenses, desperately waiting for a single phone call that held the absolute power to determine your entire future. On the second afternoon, Lawrence Abbott paid a visit. He arrived laden with thick contracts, arcane legal documents, and meticulous explanations of generational trusts and inheritance law that caused Ethan's head to spin dizzyingly. "If the test proves positive," Lawrence explained with measured patience, "you will inherit Jonathan's 40% share. However, as you are currently only 12, you cannot legally assume control until your 25th birthday. We will therefore need the court to appoint a fiduciary guardian to manage this estate for the next 13 years. What criteria are used for this guardian? Ideally family. Richard is the logical, immediate choice, being the only living relative." Lawrence hesitated, tapping a pen against the file. "But given the severe antagonism of your initial meeting, I completely understand if you would prefer us to appoint a neutral, professional trustee instead." Ethan considered Richard, the glacial contempt in his eyes when he'd first delivered the stinging insult, the raw, sudden tears when he'd recognized the possible truth, the fierce, unexpected protectiveness when he demanded the immediate hotel suite and financial support. "What would my father have wanted?" Ethan asked quietly. Lawrence's reserved expression softened with genuine feeling. "Jonathan loved his brother deeply. They fought constantly. Richard believed Jonathan was reckless and irresponsible, and Jonathan thought Richard was painfully rigid. But beneath it all, they were inseparable. If Jonathan were standing here today, he would unequivocally want Richard to be the one to care for his son. Then Richard," Ethan decided firmly, "if the test is positive." On the morning of the 3rd day, Ethan woke abruptly to the insistent vibration of the borrowed cell phone. It was a text message from Richard. "Results are in. I am en route to the hotel now. We will proceed to Lawrence's office together." Ethan's hands were shaking so severely that it took 3 attempts to type the simple reply, "Okay." Richard arrived 30 minutes later, looking utterly defeated and exhausted. The usual meticulous polish was gone. His famous silver hair was disheveled and flat. His expensive suit was visibly rumpled. His eyes were deeply red-rimmed, betraying a complete lack of sleep. "Are you ready?" Richard asked, his voice low and tight. "No," Ethan admitted honestly. "But let's go anyway." The subsequent ride to Lawrence's downtown office was a suffocating void of silence. Ethan fixed his gaze out the armored window, watching the city rush past in a meaningless, panicked blur, concentrating fiercely on nothing but keeping the contents of his anxious stomach exactly where they belonged. Lawrence's office was situated on the 20th floor of a skyscraper that perfectly embodied old-world wealth and generational secrets. The room was dominated by dark wood paneling, worn leather armchairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a historic park where, Ethan noted, normal people walked normal dogs and lived normal, unthreatened lives. Lawrence sat behind his vast mahogany desk, an innocuous manila folder lying squarely in front of him. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of absolute neutrality. Lawrence gestured towards the mahogany chairs. "Sit," he requested gently, his voice barely disturbing the tense silence of the office. Ethan and Richard complied, the leather creaking slightly under their weight. The manila folder containing the results lay accusingly on the vast desk between them, an inert but highly volatile device, a live bomb set to detonate the foundations of two separate lives. Before reaching for it, Lawrence leaned forward, his expression solemn. "Before I open this," he stated, his lawyerly caution apparent, "I want both of you to grasp one critical truth. Whatever genetic material this analysis confirms, it alters nothing about the current reality." He paused, meeting Richard's eyes, then Ethan's. "Ethan lost his mother barely 3 weeks ago. He is utterly alone, terrified, and facing an impossible future. That anguish is authentic, Richard. That bond is real regardless of any sequence of letters on this page." "Just open the damn thing," Richard ground out. His patience evaporated, his voice laced with desperate impatience. Lawrence slid a silver letter opener under the tab, his movements meticulous, perhaps trying to delay the inevitable consequence of the information within. He unfolded the single, stark white page, scanning the fine print once, then returning to the crucial paragraph, his gaze lingering. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet, glistening with unshed tears. "The test is conclusive," Lawrence declared, his voice thick with profound emotion. "Ethan Morgan Cole is Jonathan Sterling's biological son. We have 99% certainty. There is no question. None." The world outside the office seemed to mute instantly. For Ethan, the powerful, definitive words registered only as noise, an impossible sequence of sounds. If they were true, the entire architecture of his life collapsed, giving way to something immense and terrifyingly new. Richard inhaled sharply, a ragged, strangled gasp, as if a physical fist had connected with his sternum. He shot up from his chair, his movements jerky and uncontrolled, stumbling toward the vast pane of glass overlooking the city. He leaned heavily against the cold surface, pressing his forehead hard against it as silent, body-rattling sobs overtook him. Lawrence rose quickly, concern etched deep into his face. "Richard. He had a son," Richard managed to whisper, the sound brittle and broken. "Jonathan had a child. A nephew. All this time I had family, and I didn't know he existed." The realization was a torrent of guilt. He struggled, growing up in hardship, while I was isolated in that ridiculous mansion. He watched his mother fade away while I simply threw money at superficial problems. He was utterly alone, and I was right here. "You couldn't possibly have been expected to know," Lawrence insisted, moving closer. "I should have tried harder to find them." Richard whipped around, his face glistening with tears and raw self-loathing. "After Jonathan's death, Sarah vanished. I rationalized it, told myself she'd moved on, found a new life, that she wanted nothing to do with the suffocating world of the Sterlings." He choked on the words. "But the vile truth is, I didn't search with any real effort because a part of me was relieved. Relieved she was poor, relieved she was unsuitable." relieved I could believe she was just a temporary, damaging distraction for my brilliant younger brother. She wasn't a distraction, Ethan said softly, his voice cutting through the heavy air with unexpected authority. She was the true love of his life. Ethan recalled the moment, a memory precious and sharp. She told me that once, when I asked about my father, she said Jonathan was the only man who ever made her feel truly significant, like her existence mattered. Richard's handsome, severe features collapsed in profound sorrow. And I treated you precisely the way I treated her, as if you were an inconvenience, nothing utterly disposable. He swallowed hard. I fulfilled every single negative expectation she ever held regarding this family. But you changed, Ethan argued, looking up at the towering man. You reached out. You helped secure the hotel for Mom. You organized this test, this whole impossible situation. You didn't have to do any of it. It's not enough, Richard declared, his voice fierce with self-recrimination. It will never be enough. But Ethan, I swear to you, I swear upon my brother's memory, I will spend every remaining moment of my life ensuring you know your value, that you are family, and that you are profoundly wanted here. Lawrence cleared his throat, a necessary sound to regain focus. There is something further. He tapped the report with a careful finger. The DNA analysis isolated a specific inherited genetic marker. It's unique to the Sterling lineage. It manifests as a distinctive birthmark, a small, dark crescent shape, almost universally located on the left shoulder blade. Ethan's hand moved instinctively, ghosting over the skin beneath his shirt near his left shoulder. The crescent mark. He'd lived with it his entire life, the one his mother would gently kiss, referring to it affectionately as his moon mark. Jonathan carried the exact same mark, Lawrence confirmed, his voice hushed. In the precise location, the statistical probability of this being a random coincidence approaches zero. It is astronomical. Lawrence let the weight of the fact settle. This is confirmation beyond mere DNA. This is definitive proof. Proof, Richard finished, stepping away from the window, his voice gaining strength. Absolute, undeniable, physical proof that you are my brother's son. Richard moved towards Ethan, dropping gracefully to one knee beside the boy's chair, bringing them eye level. He took Ethan's small, still shaking hands firmly in his own. Welcome to the family, Ethan, Richard said, his powerful voice trembling uncontrollably. You are a Sterling now. You are my nephew. You are the living legacy of Jonathan. And I promise you, I swear on everything I hold sacred, you will never endure being alone again. The formal declaration broke Ethan. He launched himself forward, wrapping his arms fiercely around Richard's neck and burying his face into his shoulder. The floodgates opened. The latent terror, the fresh agony of loss, the fragile, desperate hope that had sustained him for the past 3 agonizing days, all poured out in wrenching, broken cries. Richard held him just as tightly, his own chest heaving as he wept. He was mourning the beloved brother tragically snatched away and simultaneously celebrating the astonishing discovery of the nephew he never knew he needed. Lawrence watched the raw, emotional spectacle, tears freely tracing paths down his own cheeks, witnessing the messy, beautiful birth of a new family connection forged from the ruins of profound tragedy. After a long moment, they drew apart, leaving Ethan slightly breathless. Richard gently cradled Ethan's face in his large hands. I have something I want to give you, he murmured. He retrieved his phone, navigating quickly to an album, and presented the screen to Ethan. I found this hidden among Jonathan's personal effects. I believe you should see it. The image displayed a young man in his early 20s, possessing dark, slightly unruly hair and striking green-gold eyes. Eyes Ethan recognized instantly. He was standing beside a radiant woman who was unmistakably Ethan's mother, Sarah. They were captured at a bustling carnival or fair, consumed by easy laughter, his protective arm draped over her waist, her head resting intimately on his shoulder. They radiated a pure, uncomplicated happiness, a fierce, protective love that suggested the rest of the chaotic world simply ceased to exist. Ethan stared, transfixed, at the face of his father for the very first time. The resemblance was immediate, shocking. The precise shape of the eyes, the confident cut of the jawline, the slight asymmetry in the smile. He was staring at himself, only older. "That's him?" Ethan breathed, the whisper trembling. "That's my dad." "That is your father," Richard confirmed, nodding solemnly. "And Ethan, he would have adored you beyond measure. He was going to be the finest father." Richard's memory became sharp. He spoke of it constantly. The children he would raise, the solid life he planned to build, the family he intended to create. If only he had known about you. Richard's voice fractured completely. If he had known you existed, absolutely nothing in this world could have kept him from you. "Mom always told me he died in a car accident." "He did," Richard confirmed, his jaw tightening as the memory surfaced. "A careless, reckless driver blew through a red light. Jonathan was killed instantly. He never suffered. He never saw it coming." Richard closed his eyes briefly. But he also never knew he was about to become a father. He never knew the woman he loved was carrying his child, our family's future. Richard looked at Ethan, raw regret consuming him. "I am profoundly sorry, Ethan. Sorry that you were denied him. Sorry that you had to grow up facing the world without your father. And I'm sorry you lost your brother." Ethan replied quietly, sensing the man's immense, complicated pain. Richard drew him into another quick, comforting embrace. "We both lost him, yes, but in doing so we somehow found each other. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is precisely what Jonathan would have orchestrated. Maybe he's out there somewhere, watching us now, content that his son and his brother finally have each other." Lawrence, ever the pragmatist, offered Ethan a tissue. "There are immediate, practical matters we need to address. The inheritance, the formal establishment of guardianship, the estate protocols." "Later," Richard cut him off, his tone absolutely firm and final. "All of that happens later. Right now, I am taking my nephew home." Richard's sprawling family estate was situated approximately 40 minutes outside the city limits. A vast property veiled behind imposing wrought iron gates and guarded by towering, ancient oak trees, silent witnesses to countless generations of sterling secrets and triumphs. As the luxurious sedan swept smoothly up the impossibly long, curving driveway, Ethan pressed his face against the cool glass, his mind struggling to catalog and process the sheer scale of the vision before him. It was not merely a house. It was a brazen, magnificent monument to incomprehensible generational wealth. The main residence was a 3-story edifice of classical stone and polished glass, featuring towering columns that felt less like architecture and more like something ripped from a museum exhibit. Manicured gardens seemed to stretch away towards an artificial horizon, maintained with military precision. In the center of the circular drive, an elaborate fountain danced, a sculpture of bronze and spraying water that likely represented a greater financial investment than every temporary, cramped residence Ethan and his mother had occupied combined. "This is where you live?" Ethan murmured, the breath catching in his throat. "This is where we live now," Richard gently corrected, placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Both of us." The car slowed to a silent stop before the immense front entrance. As Richard opened his door, a woman in her late 50s emerged from the shadow of the colossal doorway. She had gentle, discerning eyes, neatly secured graying hair, and an air of genuine, immediate warmth, a humanity that seemed utterly out of place in such an overwhelmingly intimidating setting. "That is Margaret," Richard explained softly. "She has been the true guardian of this household for over 2 decades. She knew Jonathan well. She will be overjoyed to finally meet you." Margaret descended the stone steps, and Ethan noticed the shimmer of tears in her eyes even before she reached them. "Master Ethan," she said, her voice heavy with unexpected emotion. "Welcome home, dear. You resemble him so closely, so very much like our Jonathan." "You knew my father?" Ethan asked, startled by the instant connection. "I did," Margaret confirmed, smiling through her tears. "He was the kindest person I have ever known. He always found a moment for true conversation. He never forgot a birthday. He possessed a rare gift for making everyone, regardless of their station, feel that they profoundly mattered. She wiped her cheeks quickly. He would have been absolutely over the moon to meet you. Margaret ushered them into the foyer. The space alone was larger than the entire motel unit Ethan had inhabited days before. Polished marble floors mirrored the incredible light cast by a crystal chandelier hanging above, scattering dazzling, captured starlight across the surfaces. A magnificent, sweeping staircase of dark wood curved elegantly toward the upper level. Doors branched off in every conceivable direction, offering glimpses into rooms of opulence Ethan had previously only encountered on cinema screens. "I have prepared the blue bedroom for you," Margaret announced, her voice soft. "It was your father's room when he was growing up. I thought perhaps you might feel a connection there." Ethan felt a painful lump form in his throat, making speech difficult. "My dad's room. If you would prefer another suite," Richard quickly offered. "No," Ethan said immediately, shaking his head. "I want to see it. Please." Margaret led him up the grand staircase, down a long hallway lined with ancestral portraits, to a door situated at the very end. She opened it, and Ethan crossed the threshold, stepping directly into the preserved sanctuary of his father's childhood. The blue bedroom was expansive but retained a comforting scale. A heavy four-poster bed was positioned against one wall. Tall windows offered a sweeping, tranquil view of the elaborate gardens below. A wall of built-in shelves was packed tightly with books, volumes Jonathan had consumed decades earlier. On a solid wooden desk, a framed photograph stood. A much younger Richard and Jonathan, arms thrown carelessly around each other's shoulders, mid-laugh at some forgotten joke occurring just out of frame. "I kept this room exactly as he left it," Richard said quietly from the doorway, his voice thick with the weight of memory. "I couldn't bring myself to alter a single thing. After the accident, I used to come in here simply to sit, trying desperately to feel near him again." Ethan gravitated toward the bookshelves, his fingers trailing over the aged spines. Classic adventure novels, vintage science fiction, well-worn poetry anthologies. His father, like him, had been a voracious reader. He used to underline his favorite passages, Richard noted, stepping forward and carefully extracting a worn, familiar copy of a fantasy novel. He flipped it open to a seemingly random page. Ethan saw faint pencil marks drawing attention to a specific quote. "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who you die for." "He lived by that," Richard continued, a faint smile touching his lips. "It drove our father absolutely mad. Jonathan believed family was constructed through deep love and conscious choice, not merely bloodline and stifling obligation. He was constantly championing individuals our father deemed beneath us, perpetually fighting for the forgotten underdog. Like my mom," Ethan observed quietly. "Exactly like your mother." Richard's expression darkened. "Our father formally forbade Jonathan from continuing the relationship. He called her inappropriate, unsuitable, claiming she would sabotage his carefully planned future. Jonathan simply looked him in the eye and said Sarah was his future. And if father couldn't accept that truth, then perhaps he and Jonathan had no future as father and son." Richard sat heavily on the edge of the four-poster bed, lost in the crushing details of the past. They had a catastrophic fight, screaming, threats, unforgivable ultimatums exchanged. Jonathan packed a single bag and walked out, moving into a minuscule downtown apartment, taking construction work simply to cover the rent. Father was incandescent with rage, convinced Jonathan was wantonly discarding every privilege he'd been afforded. "What did you do?" Ethan asked, needing to hear the full story. Richard's laugh was a desolate, bitter sound. "I sided with father. I played the sensible older brother. I told Jonathan he was being reckless, childishly impulsive. I insisted Sarah was exploiting his wealth, that he would eventually regret choosing some impoverished girl over the magnificent sterling legacy." Richard looked at Ethan, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "I was so smugly certain I was right, so utterly convinced that I knew what constituted best for my younger brother. And then he died. The pause was deafening. He died barely 2 weeks after that terrible final confrontation. We never found the time to reconcile. The last words I ever spoke to Jonathan were, "You're destroying your life over a woman who isn't worth the trouble." Richard's voice shattered. He died believing I hated him, died thinking his family had utterly rejected him. And now I discover that the woman I so cruelly insulted was carrying his child, working herself into an early grave to raise his son. And I remained oblivious because I was too self-absorbed and judgmental to ever bother looking. "Mom never spoke ill of your family," Ethan recounted. "I asked once, maybe when I was 7, why I didn't have grandparents or uncles like other kids. She just said my dad's family was complicated, and that it was better for us to manage on our own." "She was protecting you," Richard stated, conviction filling his tone. "Protecting you from people exactly like the man I was, from the suffocating judgment and deep-seated contempt she knew you would inevitably face." He turned to face Ethan directly. "But I am no longer that arrogant man, or I am trying desperately not to be. You will reside here, in your father's room, and I promise to ensure that every single day, you know that you are loved, that you belong, and that this is unequivocally your home." "What about school?" Ethan asked, the abrupt return to practicalities grounding him. "And my few things from the motel? I need to let Mrs. Chen know I'm all right." "Already handled," Richard replied smoothly. "Margaret retrieved your belongings from the motel this morning. They are already put away in the closet." Regarding education, Richard retrieved his phone, displaying the website for an elite, high-profile private academy. "Whitmore Preparatory. It is arguably the best school in the state. I've already secured your enrollment. You start next week." Ethan's stomach plummeted. "Richard, I can't go there. Just look at me. I'm a public school kid who barely scraped through standard math. Those kids will devour me." "Those students," Richard countered firmly, "will treat you with the required respect because you are a sterling. And if they dare not," he added, softening his gaze, "they will answer directly to me. However, I recognize your anxiety. Here is the commitment. Try it for 1 semester. If you truly hate it, we will immediately find an alternative. But Ethan, you deserve access to the finest education money can procure. Your father would demand that for you." A sharp, urgent knock on the door instantly cut off the discussion. Margaret appeared, her expression deeply apologetic and troubled. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a major situation developing downstairs. The media has somehow learned about Master Ethan's existence." Richard's composure instantly cracked. How could they possibly have discovered this? "Someone at the private DNA lab must have spoken to the press," Margaret reported grimly. "The story broke barely an hour ago. Secret Sterling heir discovered. It is already rapidly trending across every platform." Ethan felt the room tilt sickeningly. The media knows. The world knows. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through headlines at speed. His face turned alarmingly pale. "They're already calling your mother a gold digger, claiming she deliberately hid you to extort funds." He stopped, his eyes fixed on the screen, reading something that filled him with cold fury. "What?" Ethan demanded, dread clutching his throat. "What else are they saying?" "Nothing that holds any meaning," Richard said tightly. "Lawrence is already coordinating a comprehensive statement. We will dictate this narrative." "Let me see," Ethan insisted, grabbing the phone before Richard could object. The headlines were savage and relentless. "Billionaire's secret love child claims fortune. Cleaning woman's son inherits millions. Sterling family scandal. Dead heir's hidden child emerges." The comments section below was a cesspool of hatred. Vicious strangers branding his mother with horrific names, questioning Ethan's legitimacy despite the DNA confirmation, suggesting the entire situation was an elaborate, cynical scam. "They're destroying her memory," Ethan whispered, tears starting to fall freely. "Mom worked herself to death, and they're calling her a liar, criminal, He couldn't force the vile insults strangers were writing about the woman who had sacrificed everything for him out of his mouth. Richard gently retrieved the phone, his expression hard and resolute. "We will rectify this tomorrow morning. We are convening an emergency press conference." He looked down at Ethan. "You are under absolutely no obligation to attend, but if you feel the need to stand up and defend your mother's memory, I will be standing right next to you." "I'll do it," Ethan stated instantly, the decision requiring no debate. "I will tell them the unvarnished truth about her." "Are you certain?" Richard probed. "The media can be monstrously cruel. They will ask invasive, hostile questions. They will attempt to trip you up." "I don't care," Ethan replied fiercely, a burning resolve settling in his young eyes. "Mom spent 12 years shielding me from people who judge ruthlessly. She is not here now to defend her honor, so I will defend her." His voice rose slightly. "I will ensure the world understands that Sarah Cole was a profoundly good, honorable person who adored her son and never once sought a single thing she hadn't earned through sheer effort." Richard stared at him, recognition and something akin to awe shining in his eyes. "You are exactly like Jonathan," he whispered. "He possessed that same unyielding fire, that fierce refusal to retreat when something truly mattered. Will you help me formulate what to say?" "We will do better than formulate," Richard corrected, his tone turning conspiratorial. "We will tell the whole truth, every single complicated piece of it, about the real love between Jonathan and Sarah, about how your mother chose to raise you alone, driven by pride and perhaps fear, refusing to accept tainted charity, about how she juggled 3 jobs and died tragically young because ruthless poverty possesses no respect for human dignity." He pulled Ethan into a reassuring hug. "We are going to make sure that everyone knows Sarah Cole was a hero, that she sacrificed everything for her son, that this family failed her, and by extension, failed you, and that we will dedicate the remainder of our lives to rectifying that failure." Later that night, Ethan lay suspended in the enormous 4-poster bed in his father's childhood room, staring blankly at the ornate ceiling, his mind reeling from the impossible density of the day. 3 days ago, he had been teetering on the edge of homelessness. Now he was housed in a palatial mansion, a designated heir to a vast fortune, scheduled to face the judgmental glare of the international media as the newly discovered, secret son of Jonathan Sterling. His phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. It was a text from Mrs. Chun. * Saw the news. Are you safe, sweetheart? * Ethan quickly tapped out a reply. * I'm safe. I'm living with my uncle now. A lot. * A moment later, her response arrived. * Your mother would be so proud of you. So very proud. Ethan stared at the words, the familiar font blurring through sudden tears. But would she truly be proud? Or would she be heartbroken, perhaps horrified, that the precious secret she had fiercely guarded for 12 years was now grotesquely plastered across lurid headlines? Her name cruelly smeared by strangers who had never known her sacrifice? He slid out of the heavy bed and walked silently to the window. The expansive estate grounds stretched out beneath the moonlight, infinite and perfectly sculpted. Somewhere beyond the imposing iron gates, he knew, hungry reporters were already camping, hoping for a stray photo, an unguarded quote. Anything to feed the insatiable, churning media machine. "I am going to make this right, Mom," Ethan whispered to his reflection in the glass. "I'm going to make sure they know exactly who you were. I swear it." A very soft, almost hesitant knock on the door frame drew Ethan's attention. Richard stood there, illuminated by the hallway light, clearly as restless as Ethan. "Can't find any peace either?" Richard asked gently. "Too much cycling through my head," Ethan admitted. Richard walked in, joining Ethan at the window. For a protracted moment, they stood side by side, gazing out at the vast, silent, moonlit gardens. "Your father used to stand right here at this very window," Richard confided quietly. "Whenever he felt overwhelmed, deeply frightened or furious, he would come here and just look up at the stars. He claimed it offered perspective, a way to remember that his immediate problems were insignificant when measured against the sheer scope of the universe." Did it help him? Yes. He possessed this extraordinary inner resource, this ability to find genuine peace right in the middle of chaos. I always deeply envied that in him. Richard's voice grew painfully thick. I carry a terrible load of regrets, Ethan. 1,000 things I would undo if I could buy them back. But the heaviest is that I never once told Jonathan that I was proud of him. Proud of his courage to love without limits. Proud of his spine when standing up to our father. Proud of him for forging his own path. You can tell me, Ethan said quietly, meeting his uncle's gaze. I am his son. Perhaps that transfers some of the credit. Richard's eyes swam with fresh tears. Then I will tell you every day. He took a deep breath. I am profoundly proud of you, Ethan. Proud of the courage you demonstrated walking into my intimidating building. Proud of the unwavering devotion you show your mother. Proud of the remarkable young man you are becoming, despite all the crushing loss you've endured. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, the words small and weak. Scared of tomorrow, scared of the media, scared of saying the wrong thing and making everything worse. Then we will be scared together, Richard affirmed, placing a solid hand on Ethan's shoulder. But we will face it together, too. You are no longer alone, Ethan. You are family now, and Sterlings protect their own. As they stood together at the very window where Jonathan Sterling had sought solace, uncle and nephew, Ethan felt a subtle but profound change occur within him. He was still undeniably scared, still deeply submerged in grief, still utterly overwhelmed by the pace of events. But crucially, for the first time since his mother's passing, he was not navigating the ordeal alone. And maybe, just maybe, that sudden, shared burden was enough to face whatever came next. The clock was counting down toward the 2 p.m. press conference at the glittering Sterling Industries headquarters. By midday, the street below the building was a chaotic maelstrom, choked with vehicles, massive satellite trucks, dozens of reporters jostling for position, and hundreds of curious onlookers drawn by the lurid headlines. Ethan stood silently in Richard's immense corner office on the 45th floor, peering down at the frantic chaos, battling a surging wave of nausea. You absolutely do not have to do this, Richard insisted for at least the 10th time, his tone tight with anxiety. I can manage the press alone. You are 12 years old. No rational person expects you to face this. Mom would expect it, Ethan stated quietly, his eyes focused on the crowds below. She always taught me. If something is important, you fight for it, even when fear is paralyzing you. Lawrence entered, carrying an imposing folder stuffed thick with drafted statements, lengthy legal disclaimers, and comprehensive crisis management protocols. The PR team has formulated key talking points, Lawrence explained efficiently. Stick rigorously to these scripts. Do not deviate, and we maintain control of the narrative. Ethan briefly skimmed the prepared pages. It was pure corporate jargon, sanitized, emotionally neutered language. It sounded nothing like the truth. No, he said, pushing the folder back firmly. I will not read someone else's lies. I am telling the truth. My truth about my mother. Ethan, the media will deliberately twist anything you utter. Lawrence started to protest. Then let them twist the truth, instead of twisting cynical lies. Ethan interrupted, cutting off the lawyer with startling authority. I am doing this my way. Richard and Lawrence exchanged a loaded glance. Finally, Richard offered a slow, decisive nod. All right, your way it is. But I will be standing directly beside you, every single second. Margaret appeared carrying a new suit, perfectly tailored overnight. It was expensive but elegantly simple, avoiding ostentation. As Ethan changed into the unfamiliar garment, he caught his reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the image staring back. He looked years older, suddenly serious and composed, like someone who inherently belonged in corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. But internally, he was still the same terrified child who had witnessed his mother die on a cramped kitchen floor. Ready? Richard asked softly, standing just outside the dressing room. No, Ethan replied, straightening his new jacket. But let's go anyway. The designated conference room was packed beyond maximum capacity. Reporters were struggling fiercely for the best camera angles. Massive television cameras lined the perimeter. The air was charged, predatory. Dozens of journalists sensing the opportunity for a spectacular, emotionally damaging scoop. Ethan walked toward the central podium with Richard protecting his flank, and the room instantly erupted in a blinding flash of strobes and a deafening volley of shouted questions. Ethan, is it true your mother hid you for a settlement? How does it feel to be worth millions? Did your mother plan this from the very beginning? Are you really Jonathan Sterling's son? Or is this just an elaborate, calculated scam? The intrusive questions flew like stones, sharp and relentless, aimed straight at the heart of the 12-year-old boy. Richard slowly raised a hand, a gesture of command that was somehow more potent than any shout, and impossibly, the room quieted, the buzzing energy of the media abruptly silenced. Thank you all for coming, Richard began, his voice surprisingly steady, modulated to the professional tone of a man accustomed to addressing power. 3 days ago, a young man walked into this building claiming to be my brother Jonathan's son. I didn't believe him. I did worse than that. I humiliated him publicly, called him a liar, and accused his deceased mother of fraud. The room was now wrapped in profound silence. Seasoned journalists, smelling something deeper, something far more resonant than the cheap scandal they had anticipated, gripped their notebooks tighter. I was wrong, Richard continued, his voice cracking slightly, thick with the weight of that admission. DNA testing has confirmed with 99% certainty that Ethan Morgan Cole is Jonathan Sterling's biological son. He is my nephew. He is family. And every horrible, contemptuous thing I said to him, every assumption I made about his mother, was rooted in nothing but my own arrogance, my prejudice, and my utter contempt for people I believed were beneath me. Cameras flashed, strobe lights firing like rapid-fire bursts of lightning. Reporters scribbled frantically, documenting the fall of one powerful man and the rise of another. But I'm not here to talk about my failures, Richard said, taking a deliberate step back. I'm here so my nephew can tell you about his mother, Sarah Cole, the woman you have all been slandering, mocking, and destroying in your speculative headlines. He stepped aside entirely, a genuine gesture of deference, inviting Ethan to take the microphone. Ethan's small hands shook violently as he gripped the dark wood of the podium. Hundreds of intense, scrutinizing eyes were locked on him. Millions more would watch this playback later, dissecting every hesitation, every tear. Everything he said would be analyzed, quoted, and inevitably misquoted. He reached into the inner pocket of his slightly ill-fitting jacket and pulled out a photograph, the one Richard had given him. Jonathan and Sarah at the fair, young, vibrant, and radiantly in love. This is my mom, Ethan began, his voice barely a whisper, catching immediately with emotion. Sarah Cole. And this is my father, Jonathan Sterling. I never met my father. He died 2 weeks before my mom found out she was pregnant. But I knew my mom for 12 years. And I want you, all of you, to know who she really was. He lifted his gaze directly to the array of unblinking camera lenses. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us in a crumbling apartment. She cleaned office buildings at night until her hands bled. She did laundry services during the day, hauling heavy bags of clothes up and down stairs. She babysat on weekends for whatever she could get. She worked 70, 80 hours a week, every single week. Not because she was lazy or unmotivated, or any of the disgusting things your headlines have called her. She worked that much because that's what it takes to survive when you are poor and alone in this country. His voice gained a steady, iron strength. I've read what you've written about her, that she was a gold digger, that she trapped my father, that she hid me away planning to extort money from the Sterling family. All of that is a lie. The room was utterly, suffocatingly silent. My mom had this letter. Ethan held up the worn envelope that had started this whole ordeal, the paper thin and fragile with age. For 12 years. 12 years she could have used it at any moment. She could have claimed the inheritance. Could have given us easier lives, a real home, proper medical care. She could have saved herself from working until her body literally gave out. Tears streamed down his face now, but he made no move to wipe them away. But she didn't. You want to know why she didn't? Because she knew exactly what people like you would say about her. that she was after the money, that she didn't deserve it, that she wasn't good enough for a Sterling. So instead of accepting help, she worked herself to death to prove you wrong. She died at 39 years old because her heart just stopped from sheer exhaustion. I found her collapsed in our kitchen. I called 911 and begged them to hurry, and I held her hand while she died, right there on the linoleum floor, because the ambulance took 17 long minutes to reach our neighborhood, the poor neighborhood that doesn't get fast response times. Several reporters were openly crying now, the shock transforming the predatory energy in the room into something raw and deeply human. My mom's last words to me were, "You're going to be okay, baby. You're stronger than you know." Ethan's voice shattered completely. But she was wrong. I'm not stronger. She was the strong one. She was the one who sacrificed everything, every piece of her own future so I could have a chance at something better. He looked briefly at Richard, then back out at the cameras. 3 weeks ago, I was facing homelessness. I had nowhere to go, no family, no future. Then I found this letter hidden in my mom's meager belongings, and I learned that my father was Jonathan Sterling, and that I had family who didn't know I existed. I came here desperate and scared, and Richard Sterling treated me exactly like my mom feared he would. Like I was nothing. Like I was a criminal trying to steal something I hadn't earned. Richard flinched violently, absorbing the truth, but remained silent. But then something incredible happened. Ethan continued, his tone softening slightly. Richard changed. He stopped and he listened. He managed to get past his prejudices and his contempt and his assumptions about poor people. And he saw me, really saw me, saw a scared kid who needed help, not a thief. And now he's my uncle, my guardian, my family. Because people can change. People can choose to be better than their worst, most prejudiced moments. Ethan held up the photograph again, letting them all see the young, loving couple. Jonathan Sterling and Sarah Cole fell in love despite every single obstacle society and their families put in their way. Despite his family's certain disapproval, despite knowing the entire world would judge them, they loved each other anyway. My father died never knowing he was going to be a father. My mom spent 12 years raising me alone, protecting me from a family she truly believed would reject us. And maybe she was right to be scared. Maybe her fears were completely justified. But she was also wrong about one thing. Ethan looked directly into Richard Sterling's tear-filled eyes. She was wrong that all wealthy people are heartless, that all families would reject a poor kid claiming to be one of them. Because my uncle proved that people can choose to be better. They can choose compassion over contempt. They can choose to see the humanity in people they were taught their whole lives to dismiss. The room erupted, a cacophony of shouting questions, but Ethan wasn't finished. "I'm going to inherit a lot of money," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the chaos. $450 million. That's more money than I can even begin to comprehend. And I could use it to live in vast mansions and buy flashy cars and try to prove to everyone I'm as good as any Sterling. But that's not what my mom would want. That's not what my father would want. He pulled out a piece of paper, handwritten, shaking slightly in his grip. "So, I'm announcing today the creation of the Sarah Cole Foundation for Working Families. Every single penny of my inheritance will go into this foundation, dedicated to helping people like my mom. Single parents working multiple minimum wage jobs. Families who are one paycheck away from total eviction. Kids who deserve opportunities but simply can't afford them. Because my mom taught me something your headlines missed entirely. Wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about what you choose to do with it. It's about using whatever privilege you're given to uplift and support people who weren't given the same chances." Ethan's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the sensitive microphone carried it to every stunned corner of the room. "My mom died believing she failed me, died thinking she hadn't given me enough. But she gave me everything that truly matters. She taught me dignity. She taught me work ethic. She taught me that your worth as a human being has absolutely nothing to do with the balance in your bank account. And if Sarah Cole, who cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors, had more inherent dignity and worth than most wealthy people I've met, then maybe we need to completely rethink how we measure success in this country." He stepped back from the microphone, physically and emotionally drained, breathing heavily. The room instantly exploded. Reporters were shouting questions over each other. A wave of noise. Ethan, all of your inheritance? What contribution will Richard make? When does the foundation officially launch? Richard stepped forward, gently placing a supportive hand on Ethan's shoulder. I'll answer all your questions, but first, I want to say something. He looked at Ethan, tears now streaming freely down his own face, unchecked. My nephew just taught me more about character and purpose in 5 minutes than I learned in 56 years of living. And he's absolutely right. Sarah Cole had more dignity than I have ever possessed. So here is what I am doing. I am matching Ethan's contribution dollar for dollar. The Sarah Cole Foundation will launch with $900 million. And it will operate with one simple, inviolable principle. That every person deserves dignity, opportunity, and the chance to build a better life for their children. Because that's what Sarah Cole did. That's what she died trying to do. And the least we can do, the very least, is honor her memory by helping other families avoid the same brutal fate. The questions continued for another grueling hour. Lawrence fielded the complex legal ones, his composure unwavering. Richard handled the financial details and future strategy. But whenever reporters asked about Sarah, her personality, her spirit, her dreams, Ethan answered. He told them about her laugh, loud and uninhibited, the sound of pure joy, about how she sang terribly off-key while cooking their meager dinners, about the elaborate, fantastical bedtime stories she invented when they couldn't afford to buy books, about the way she'd saved for months, hiding away spare change to buy him a birthday present. He spoke of her fierce pride and her even fiercer love. By the time the press conference finally ended, not a single reporter in that room still held the cynical belief that Sarah Cole had been a gold digger. That night, the video of Ethan's speech went globally viral. It wasn't the expected scandal version the media had prepared for, but Ethan's raw, honest, heartbreaking testimony about his mother, about grinding poverty, about dignity, and about the devastating cost of survival. Headlines shifted dramatically. 12-year-old heir's devastating tribute to working mother. Boy donates entire fortune to honor dead mother. Sarah Cole, the hero behind the sterling scandal. The narrative had completely flipped, turning the victimized mother into a martyr and a symbol. Ethan watched the coverage from Richard's luxurious, silent office, exhausted and emotionally hollowed out. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from Mrs. Chan, from old teachers, from perfect strangers who'd seen the video and wanted to share their own crushing stories of struggle. You did it, Richard said quietly, standing by the window. You made them see her. Really see her. I hope so, Ethan whispered, rubbing his tired eyes. I hope wherever she is, she knows. I tried. Richard pulled him close, holding him tightly. She knows. And she's proud. So incredibly proud, Ethan. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the distant skyscrapers gold, Ethan felt something monumental shift inside him. The raw, debilitating grief was still present, and always would be. But alongside it was something potent and new, purpose. His mother had worked herself to death trying to give him a better life. Now, he suddenly possessed the resources to give thousands of families the precise help she'd been too proud, or too terrified of judgment, to ask for herself. It wasn't enough to bring her back. Could never be enough. But it was something real. And maybe, just maybe, that would honor Sarah Cole's memory in a way that truly mattered, the way she'd always deserved to be honored as a hero. 3 years changed everything, cementing the foundation as an unstoppable force for good. Ethan stood in the opulent marble lobby where his life had first been irrevocably transformed. But this time, he wasn't the scared, skinny 12-year-old carrying a battered suitcase. At 15, he had grown taller, his frame filling out, his confidence evident, though his eyes still held that same fierce, quiet determination. Today wasn't about him, though. Today was about everyone else. The Sarah Cole Foundation headquarters occupied the entire 20th floor of a refurbished building in the very neighborhood where Ethan had grown up, strategically placed miles away from the wealthy district where Richard's corporate office gleamed. Here, in the heart of the community, where people understood struggle because they lived it every single day. Nervous? Richard asked, adjusting his nephew's tie with the practiced care of someone who'd learned that small, sincere gestures of affection mattered infinitely more than grand, impersonal ones. Terrified, Ethan admitted, meeting his uncle's gaze. What if I mess up the speech? Then you'll mess it up with authenticity, which is vastly better than perfection without heart. Richard smiled, and it was a warm, genuine expression, so radically different from the cold, ruthless businessman who'd mocked a frightened child 3 years prior. Your mother would be so proud, Ethan. I hope you know that deep down. I think about her every single day, Ethan whispered. Wonder what she'd think of all this. Of a foundation with her name on it. The ceremony hall was packed to capacity with the families the foundation had directly helped. Single mothers who'd received crucial child care assistance. Fathers who'd finally gotten essential job training. Kids who'd earned scholarships to universities they never dared dream of attending. 3,000 lives demonstrably changed. 3,000 tangible reasons Sarah Cole's tragic death hadn't been meaningless. Mrs. Chun sat proudly in the front row, tears already glistening on her cheeks. Beside her was Margaret, who had stepped into a role like a doting grandmother to Ethan. Lawrence was there too, semi-retired but still serving diligently as the foundation's chief legal advisor. And scattered throughout the crowd were faces Ethan recognized from news stories. Families who had shared their struggles publicly, helping reshape how America viewed working poverty. The mayor stood at the podium, praising the foundation's unprecedented impact on city relief efforts. A state senator spoke passionately about proposed legislation, directly inspired by Sarah's story, aimed at protecting low-wage workers. A university president announced new scholarship programs named in Sarah's honor. But when Ethan finally took the stage, the crowd rose in a thunderous, emotional applause that lasted 5 full minutes. He waited patiently, hands gripping the podium, until the noise finally subsided into expectant silence. 3 years ago, Ethan began, his voice surprisingly steady and clear. I stood at a very different podium and told you about my mother, about Sarah Cole, who worked herself to death because that's what sheer survival required. Today, I want to tell you what has happened since then. Not just the cold numbers, though those are impressive. We've helped over 15,000 families, funded 200 scholarships, and prevented 4,000 painful evictions. Those numbers matter profoundly, but they are not the real story. He pulled out a folded letter, his hands trembling slightly despite his practiced confidence. This came last week from a woman named Maria Santos. She's a single mother who works as a custodian at an elementary school, just like my mom did. With the foundation's help, she went to night school and just became a certified licensed teacher. Her daughter starts college next month on a Sarah Cole Foundation scholarship. Ethan's voice cracked deeply this time. Maria wrote, I used to think I failed my daughter by not being able to afford college tuition. Your foundation taught me that working hard and loving my child fiercely is success. That I didn't fail, that people like us matter. Please tell your mother thank you. He looked up, tears streaming again. But I can't tell my mother thank you. She died thinking she wasn't enough. Died believing she failed me because we were poor. And that is the real tragedy. Not that poverty exists, but that we've built a society where loving, sacrificing parents believe they have failed simply because they couldn't afford what wealthier families take entirely for granted. The crowd was rapt, silent, hanging on every word. My Uncle Richard taught me something important. Ethan gestured toward Richard in the front row, who quickly wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. He taught me that people can change. That even someone who spent 56 years believing wealth equaled inherent worth can learn to see the world completely differently. Richard was cruel to me that first day, called me a homeless child, accused my mother of fraud, treated us like we were utterly worthless. Richard stood, accepting this difficult public recounting of his past. But then he chose to be better, Ethan continued, his voice ringing with conviction. He chose to examine his own prejudices. He chose to see the humanity in people's society had taught him to dismiss outright. And because of that single choice, thousands of families now have hope. That's what the Sarah Cole Foundation is truly about. Not charity, not pity, but recognition that every person has inherent, unquantifiable worth, regardless of their paycheck. That dignity shouldn't be a luxury only the wealthy can afford. Ethan pulled out the worn photograph he always carried, Jonathan and Sarah at the fair, frozen in a moment of pure, hopeful happiness. My parents fell in love across a social divide this country pretends doesn't even exist. Jonathan Sterling, heir to billions. Sarah Cole, a cleaning woman earning minimum wage. Society said they didn't belong together, that she wasn't good enough for him, that their relationship was a mistake. But my father saw something society entirely missed. He saw strength. He saw courage. He saw a woman who worked 3 jobs and still found the energy to laugh, who had nothing material but gave absolutely everything she had. They had so little time together. My father died never knowing I existed. My mother spent 12 years raising me alone, protecting me from a family she believed, with every fiber of her being, would reject us. Ethan's voice dropped to a near whisper, and maybe her fears were justified. Maybe she was right to be scared. But she was also wrong about one thing. She was wrong that love couldn't bridge that divide. That understanding was impossible. That people couldn't fundamentally change because here we are, 3 years later. A foundation bearing her name. Thousands of families helped. Lives transformed. And all of it exists because one scared kid walked into a sterile corporate building and demanded to be seen. Because one bitter man chose compassion over contempt. Because one woman worked herself to death and left behind a son determined to make her sacrifice mean everything. The crowd was openly weeping now, but Ethan was not quite finished. I learned something vital from losing my mother and finding my family. Legacy isn't about marble monuments or massive bank accounts. It's about the lives you touch and the hearts you change. My mother touched my heart. My father's love created me. My uncle proved people can grow and evolve. And all of you, he gestured widely to the packed audience. You're part of this legacy now. Every family we help, every scholarship we fund, every person who learns their worth isn't measured by their bank account. That is Sarah Cole's legacy. That's what she died for. That's what truly matters. Ethan pressed his hand over his heart, fighting for composure. Mom, if you can hear me, we made it. We're more than okay. We're exactly who you raised me to be. And we will spend the rest of our lives proving that your sacrifice changed the world for the better. The standing ovation that followed lasted a full 10 minutes, a roaring wave of gratitude and emotion, but Ethan barely heard it. He was focused solely on Richard, who had stood and was walking toward the stage with something small in his hands. A small wooden box worn with obvious age. Ethan, Richard said into the microphone, his voice thick and shaking. I found this in Jonathan's personal belongings last week. He'd hidden it carefully, and I never knew it existed. He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant, clearly expensive, but chosen with quiet love, not ostentation. Your father bought this 2 days before he died, Richard said, tears flowing freely again. He was planning to propose to your mother. He told his best friend he'd finally found the woman he wanted to spend forever with, and he didn't care what anyone, least of all me, thought. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Jonathan never got to give this to Sarah, Richard continued. But I think he'd want you to have it, as proof that their love was real, that you were never an accident or a mistake, but the deliberate product of 2 people who loved each other completely. He gently placed the box into Ethan's trembling hands. Your father would be so unbelievably proud of the man you're becoming. And your mother, his voice broke entirely. Your mother already knew. She always knew. Ethan held the ring his father had chosen for his mother 12 years ago, and something inside him that had been deeply broken since Sarah's death finally, miraculously, began to heal. Thank you, he whispered to Richard, the words catching in his throat, for giving me back my family, for choosing to see us, for proving Mom wrong about people like you. She wasn't wrong, Richard said quietly, stepping close. People like I used to be deserved her fear. But people like I'm trying to become, people like you've helped me become, maybe we deserve a second chance to prove her right about the good in the world. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the intrusive cameras had finally stopped rolling, Ethan stood alone in the foundation's main office. Photos covered the bright walls. Smiling families helped, scholarships awarded, lives transformed by opportunity. But in the very center was a single, large, beautiful, enlarged photograph. Sarah Cole, at 27, laughing at something off camera, her eyes full of life, hope, and the kind of radiant beauty that had nothing to do with wealth or status. "We did it, Mom," Ethan whispered, a shaky, relieved smile on his face. "Your life mattered. You mattered, and now the whole world knows that truth." His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, my name is James. I'm 17. My mom cleans offices just like yours did. I just got accepted to medical school on a Sarah Cole Foundation scholarship. Thank you for showing me that kids like us can actually dream big." Ethan smiled through a fresh wave of tears and typed back instantly, "Dream bigger. My mom would want you to, because that was the immutable truth." Sarah Cole had lived and died, proving that worth isn't inherited. It's earned through endless love, sacrifice, and the raw courage to keep going when everything is difficult and stacked against you. That legacy doesn't require money or status or a prestigious family name. It just requires one person brave enough to stand up and say, "I matter. My story matters. My struggle matters. And I'm going to make sure no one else has to suffer the way I did." 3 years ago, Ethan had been a scared, solitary child with nothing left to lose. Today, he stood in a building bearing his mother's name, having changed thousands of lives, surrounded by a family who loved and respected him. He had lost everything, but in doing so, he had found something far more valuable than any inheritance. He had found purpose, he had found family, and he had found proof that even from the darkest tragedy, something profoundly beautiful could grow. Sarah Cole would never know the full extent of what her son built from her sacrifice. But somewhere, somehow, Ethan believed she was finally smiling. And that was enough. That was everything.